So, oh, music, perfect. First of all, thanks for jumping in on short notice, because originally we planned to have Peter Lindholm here.
Right.
Now you jump in as Peter Malmqvist, so we're glad to have a Peter on stage.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Perfect.
Maybe let's just start with a short, like 60 seconds pitch to hear what exactly you are offering.
Sure. So we have a marketplace that offer used car trading solution for car dealerships in emerging markets. So for a consumer to sell their cars efficiently, safely, and fast through our marketplace that we offer in emerging markets that car dealerships have access to and can bid on these cars that we purchase.
You joined the company around 6 months after they launched.
Yeah.
So the original founders are Peter Lindholm, who I mentioned, and Sujay Tile. So Sujay is sort of like a Silicon Valley breed. He studied at Harvard. I think he dropped out to become a Thiel Fellow, actually.
Yeah.
And is also a serial entrepreneur before he went on to launch the Frontier Car Group.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have Peter Lindholm, who comes from the Nordics. He first was busy with Nelly.com, where he also went into different markets for them in the EU. Then he went on to Millicom, and he conquered actually emerging markets for them in Africa and around the world. So he brought in that experience. But how did these two guys meet?
Well, so they were both living in London, actually. They had a friend in common who was actually the roommate of Peter Lindholm at the time. And so he knew Sujay, knowing that Sujay wanted to do something new, start a new company, go into a new venture, and he was actually at that time working as a partner for a VC firm focusing on emerging markets. And Peter, having the operational knowledge, working with Kinnevik and Rocket Internet, also a lot in emerging markets, that friend in common found them to be two interesting persons to get together and see if they could do something together.
Then they chose to come up with that used car scheme, which obviously Auto One already probably was successful at that time. Was it a pure strategic decision to be like, oh, there's a potential we want to tap in? Or was there also a certain personal affinity to the market? Do you know if it was like a dry business-based decision? Or?
Well, it was, they saw the opportunity. I mean, Auto One did fantastically, still doing phenomenally well. And they saw that opportunity to bring that to emerging markets. We'd had lack of or completely non-existent direct competition of that specific business model. And so to bring that to emerging markets and kind of own that used car ecospace was something that they thought was very interesting.
Why did they decide to be headquartered in Berlin?
They actually have a third co-founder, which we should also mention. This is André Kuzman. André is our CTO, so he's leading the tech side of Frontier Car Group. And he is from Berlin. He was based in Berlin, so that was part of the reason. That's one of the reasons. The second one is the combination of talent and cost is good in Berlin. Of course, in US, which is the headquarters of our Topco, you find great talent in the US, but the cost is also much higher. So the combination of the two, plus Andre having networks and being from Berlin, made the decision for them basically to start here as an operational headquarters.
So they met, they decided which kind of market they want to move into. Yeah. How did they then choose their first countries to launch in?
Well, they traveled extensively to a lot of different markets initially to do research on the markets and to decide on which ones they would embark on first. And part of that decision was market size, opportunity, first mover advantage, and also just ease of transacting the registration documents of used cars. So in some countries, you have to actually go to a notary to get those documents stamped to transfer ownership from one person to the other. Whereas in the markets where we are in, it's very easy to transfer that ownership. For example, in Chile, you can do it with a fingerprint, which is fantastic, and which helps with that speed and that offer that we want to offer our clients.
Did they then just take a team they knew maybe from having worked in other startups, or that he could pull out of Rocket, who has already scaling experience in different markets, and then they put them, for example, into Mexico or Pakistan? Or how did they hire their talent in these countries?
So most, if not all, of our initial hires came through Peter Lindholm. He had an extensive network in emerging markets especially. having worked as entrepreneurs, being in contact with Kinnevik or Rocket Internet in one way or another, or having previously launched or run a Rocket Internet startup, for example. So his network was the key ingredient to getting these excellent people that we have in the emerging markets that we hire that are they're all from these markets. So we don't have any foreigner, let's say, coming outside from the market and being sort of shipped in to build the business. Everyone in the markets are from the markets.
They're from the markets, and did you pay specific attention to that they've already been active there for a couple of years, or that they have their own?
Great track record, previous entrepreneurs preferably, having started, exited, built large startups. That was the key factor to deciding on which ones.
And then did they bring also already their own team in the sense of like building up their staff, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So they were, we are fairly decentralized as an organization. We give a lot of accountability and responsibility to the local managing directors and CEOs. And so they have the responsibility of building the teams, building the skills, and we support them in any way we can. So for example, with network, if we can, we help them recruiting as well, top talent. But more often than not, they already had people they could call up and say, I have a new venture, join me in this project and build it together with me and so on. So that's how we got started very quickly.
Let's say you want to launch your startup in Mexico. I mean, I've never been to Mexico, and I might have like a very one-sided view of the country, but usually it's famous because you see it, I don't know, in some online drug trafficking Netflix docu or something like that. I imagine it's not the same as in Germany. So you might have mafia structures there, I don't know, you might have corruption. Like, how do you handle that if you move into a market that functions differently than your standard EU, German, bureaucratic, everything is sorted market?
I mean, there are a bit more risk involved. We take extreme measures to making sure that every car we purchased has the right documents. They are in the registry of the national institution that has all the cars registered. We have a fraud prevention team that keeps track of all these controls and purchases and sales that we do. We also have great people that are linked to important institutions that can be advisors for the company locally or on the board of the local entity that can also help us with those hurdles of getting going and getting all the registration documents in place, expansion across the country, opening up new storefronts, for example, is something that they can be very invaluable
for. I guess that probably that's specifically something where it's even more important to have somebody who's already integrated in the local ecosystem. I guess who knows politicians, who knows the right officers, the people who stamp the permits and everything.
Exactly, exactly.
You launched in different markets all around the world. I mean, from Mexico to Pakistan to Nigeria. I guess you didn't go there with the same brand in every market. So did you develop a unique brand for each market? Yeah.
So they're all localized. In Latin America, they're, for example, named something in Spanish. I will buy your car in Spanish, essentially. Nigeria, we call Cars 45. So we localize the brand to what we think is fit for the market where we operate, basically.
And then I guess it's a little bit more complicated with you guys because it's not a purely digital service. So people actually bring their car to a certain location. They check in. It's I think it takes 15 minutes to check in or to get the car gets assessed, and then half an hour later already they get a price, and if they want, they get their cash transferred. So you need parking spots. You need staff to look into that. Is that something? I guess it takes more time than to scale, no?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not purely a tech business, as you say. It's also a retail, offline business where we actually handle the cars. We have warehouses. We have a lot of central headcounts that manage these operations. And that takes time, but I think we've scaled that very quickly and hired the right people to be able to manage that growth at the pace that we've done it. But it is absolutely a combination of that old, let's say, offline retail model and the application of the tech on top of that.
So what is the biggest cost factor there? Is it like the training of people on site in order for them to really understand what's going on, to fit into your assessment system of the cars and everything? Or
it's headcount and it is physical presence I mean, emerging markets is very capital efficient, so it's pretty, let's say, cheap to have an FTE for the headcount. The stores are also pretty inexpensive, and so it doesn't cost at all as much as if you would expand with the same model around here in the Western world. However, that is the most capital-intensive part of the business that we have, absolutely.
How did you then make sure that you're in the right spot? Like, what was your ideal partner to choose your physical space in these different countries? Like, did you look for gas stations, or did you look for retail stores, or?
So we have three different locations. One of them is more of a flagship location, which sits on a highway street or the most expensive street in the city, which many dealers refer to as like, okay, you're that company with that store. So that's how they know us. And so we get a lot of branding through those stores. They're quite few, they're 1 or 2 per major city. The second type of store is a retail storefront. So in the bottom of a building, there's a store that can take maybe 2, 3 cars at a time that we can inspect. The third type is more of a simple container. They normally are in a parking lot of a supermarket, shopping mall, or somewhere else. We can place it, we can easily move it away to somewhere else if that specific location doesn't work out. So to answer your question, the typical partner is, for example, Walmart across Latin America is one partner. Other larger supermarket retail chains is a great partner to us, where we place those containers on their parking lots. It's very cheap, scalable, and mobile in case we want to move somewhere else.
So what I find interesting in your business model is that usually I think startups come in and they take out a middleman, and that's how they become much more cheaper and efficient. Later on, we'll have Lemonade here, for example, in the InsurTech, and they basically try to get rid of all the consultants. You actually add one more node in the sales process. From something that went directly from dealer to customer, you come in the middle. So how do you achieve to still make it a better deal for both sides?
Well, I think you have to look at the incentives or the problem for both parties. And so we see ourselves as the best partner of dealers to offer them a large range of inventory that they can browse through and purchase throughout the country. So dealers are usually restricted to their physical presence, so they buy from their customers that they have in their neighborhood where they're based, essentially. And through us, they can purchase cars throughout the country and better source for cars that more suits their customers, let's say. So if their typical customers might be Volkswagen purchasers, and they can more easily then access inventory that has specifically Volkswagen that they would sell to their customers. And for the seller that wants to sell their car to us, they typically, in emerging markets, especially so, 70% of all the used market transactions goes from C to C. So it's much larger in the Western world. And they typically take about 3 to 4 weeks to complete a transaction. It might be unsafe, going back to your Mexico question.
Unsafe in the regards that I show up at a certain spot with my 5,000 euros for the car, and actually turns out it's not somebody who wants to sell the car, just wants to get my money and take off.
Exactly.
Okay.
That might happen. And you don't know the outcome of the transaction. They might just say, no, it's not for me.
Yeah.
So you might just spend a lot of time with the uncertainty of what will happen to the transaction or your money. So we add clarity, trust, and safety and speed to that transaction. So we pay them instantaneously at the location once the transaction is closed to get money wired to them immediately to either the bank account or their wallet. So no cash involved in that transaction as well.
So it's a purely digital transaction. That's one of the benefits.
Correct.
I have like some standardized prices, I assume. And what layers are you planning to add for the customer?
In which sense do you mean?
Like, is it just for, like, are you, at the moment, obviously, it's like a much easier sales process or purchasing process for the customer on the customer side. But are you thinking of, like, additional layers that you want to implement, like financing or whatnot?
Absolutely. So for dealers, we currently offer a product called dealer financing. We launched it in Nigeria about a year ago, where the typical dealer has about $10,000 of equity on hand that they transact car with, which translate roughly in 3 cars per month, since they have an inventory cycle of about 1 month. With dealer financing, we offer them 1 month credit, if you will, for 70% of that value of the car, which means that they can then start building a larger business, become more sophisticated, and expand and hire more personnel to build a larger business. Other products that we're adding to our checkout process after they win an auction is logistics, insurance, warranties, and other products that the dealers want, basically.
How does the competition look like? I mean, and of course, like if you look at Europe, let's just say Auto One, I think they're huge and they're growing rapidly. So I guess they're sort of like on the safe side, more or less. How is it in the emerging markets? I mean, there's a lot of them out there. Like, are you afraid that other people might be faster than you because they go into markets that you're not in yet, or?
Right, so up until now, we've had the first mover advantage. There is competition in, for example, India, Indonesia. Indonesia has smaller startups that have gained funding and are doing the same business model. Otherwise, in Latin America and in Africa, it's a great opportunity for us to further expand and have that first mover advantage. On the other hand, we have experience now, we have the tech. It's very flexible, it's one platform for all, so we can roll out changes and scale new markets very quickly. We have the know-how and we have the network. So I think first priority right now is double down in our current markets. We're always looking at new opportunities and where to go in new markets moving forward. So.
How much can you compare the markets? I guess you use the same tech everywhere, but are there variations in the sales mode or in the services that you offer? Or, of course, the branding is different. We already talked about that. Sure. So how big are the variations from one market to the other? Like, I mean, you're in different continents, even from Mexico to Africa to Asia. Yeah,
I mean, the business model itself is really quite similar. Some of the products that you offer, you have to really tailor-made. So financing for dealers in Nigeria looks quite different than the financing products for Mexico and Chile. For example, for the simple reason that dealers in Nigeria look very different to the typical dealers that you have in Mexico. In Nigeria, they're usually not under like a storefront location with a brand and a lot of cash on hand. In Mexico, you have a lot more of these dealers, so they already have cash. They have a storefront, they have a market, or a brand, I should say. And so you have to sort of tailor-make that product for it to make sense on the market, because you also have more competition on that specific product. So the core model in itself, the trading model, looks really quite the same with some tweaks here and there, but then the types of products that you offer and the engagement with dealers and with sellers looks quite different depending on the market and how that looks and the culture itself.
Sorry, I got lost in my question. Yeah, I wanted to talk about partners. What kind of partners were you actively looking for? Also, being on different continents, were you looking for one partner that you could use on every continent, or just did your regional managers look for what is the best fit for Nigeria? Right.
It's oftentimes regional. So for some of the partners that we have, they have a Latin American focus. So they're present in many Latin American countries that we can piggyback right on that agreement. And there are, so most of the partners are either local or regional, not global.
Is that the same with your investors? Like, did you look for an investor, for example, that has a global reach, or what was the criteria there for you?
Yeah, so when our latest fundraise, Series C, which we closed last year in May, was led by OLX and Naspers. And we found that partnership to be fantastic for us moving forward. They obviously have the classifieds in emerging markets. And for us, that's a great way of getting more leads to our funnel and for them to get more leads from us. So consumers, for example, or someone that wants to sell their car through the platform of OLX, that feels like this is taking too much time, this is too much of a hassle, might get added value from being led to our offering of offloading those cars instantaneously in one of our locations, for example. So OLX has been a great partner for us so far, and that's one of these, as you mentioned, more of a global type of a partner on the investment side, which we integrate our product with to offer more value to our consumers and sellers.
We heard Mark talking a lot about failure earlier. So what were some mistakes that you made on the way, or like things that you're like, okay, this really went south in Mexico, we're going to do it differently in Nigeria, or?
Yeah, I think looking back, I mean, there's a lot, I guess, but one of those things that went wrong was that we purchased a car in Nigeria that was previously stolen. So we had controls in place where we double-checked the registry and it looked fine. But having purchased it, it turned out to be edited on the National Registry. And so it had been stolen and sold to us. So the police basically came to us and thought that we had, or we were in partnership with these people that had stolen that car, essentially. And so we closed down our operations. All of the purchased cars that we had, we put a lid on. We didn't sell them. And we basically inspected and audited all of the documents and the registry.
That sounds like a tedious process. What number are we talking about there?
I mean, there were probably 700 cars.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's
so
still
manageable,
doable.
but a lot.
Yes. And what did you then put in place to prevent that from happening again?
So we put a closer partnership with that registry in place. We hired more personnel to make sure that all the checks and balances and controls were in place, and that we had the time to do all of those before we were trading those cars. We also reached out to government officials, or rather previous government officials, to be advisors to our company and to create closer ties with those institutions to prevent any kind of hiccups that could create from happening as well.
So if I just sum up some of the takeaways already, I think it's like having an experienced team, people who really were busy with scaling in emerging markets or conquering emerging markets, hiring local, regional team that is already connected with government officials and everything.
Right.
Are there more things you would recommend if somebody out there is thinking about launching a business in emerging markets, independently from whether it's the car business or something completely different in the health sector? Or
yeah, I mean, I think you summarized it pretty well. I think the thing that has allowed us to scale so quickly in so many different markets at the same time, right? Because we opened simultaneously 5 different markets at the same time, and we all scaled them at the same pace. And the reason for that was basically talent. So we hired really proven previous CEOs that had the autonomy to really scale those businesses themselves with our support and with our tech. So that's number one. The second reason I would say is our tech allows for a very quick and flexible solution. So whatever solution we launch in one market is scaled to all the other ones as well.
All right, let's open it up for questions, maybe. So, are there questions in the audience already? Is there somebody who wants to launch in an emerging market and hasn't done yet, or already has launched and has certain challenges? Just raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone. No? Okay, so let's continue here then. So what is the next step? What can we expect from you guys in 5 years? Do you think, I mean, yes, we've got Auto1 in the EU and in established market, you guys in the emerging markets. Do you think you'll meet at some point? And it might be a question of Auto1 taking over Frontier Car Group, or maybe the other way around.
Right. Well, I think there is, I mean, for Auto1 and for us, there is ample market share to still be to grab in our markets. So our number one priority is to continue to scale and grow in our markets. And we foresee that to take place within the next 5+ years, because on top of that, in our markets, the consumer financing, dealer financing, transportation, these products and value adds is something that is fairly left untouched in the used car ecosystem. So on top of just offering the liquidity of these transactions, we also have a vast market of just financing and other products that we also want to own, let's say. So that whole used car ecosystem will take ample year to grab a large market share of, and in the same time expand to other markets within the emerging markets. I think that's how our next 5 to 10 years will look like.
Actually, I mean, I mentioned them a couple of times now. I think you're in friendly terms with Auto1. I think the founders, actually Peter and Hakan, or they talk a lot. And I guess since your markets are at the moment quite clearly separated, so there seems to be a benefit in sharing challenges and stuff. Or
yeah, there's basically no overlap between us. So that helps, of course. And I mean, they're great guys. They're doing a great job. So we love to listen into what they do, and the opposite way around as well, I hope.
So we started a little bit early, and that means I'm already running out of my questions a little bit ahead of time. Let me check if we're ready to wrap it up here. Caroline, how are we looking there? Can we move on to the next speaker already? We still need 4 minutes more. Okay, help me out, guys. Questions from the audience then. Who wants to know something of Peter? Well, maybe personal question. Usually in the startup scene, if you're not the founder, it's quite on vogue to change startup every 2 years, every 3 years to move on to a new position. So what could you see a next challenge after being CFO at a car? Like, would you stay in the same sector? Would you want to move on to something else?
Well, I think the challenge that we have is phenomenal. I mean, for the long run, I mean, I couldn't say anything else here, right? But
yeah.
but it's phenomenally interesting. I mean, we have so much to do, and we have a lot of different markets still after those that we're in. So I think this is a great journey to be on. I mean, as mentioned before, this whole financing aspect of the business of tapping into consumer financing, which is in some of our markets largely untapped, is sort of the next step of that whole ecosystem play, which we think is super interesting. And with that, there will be a lot of capital involved. And so for me as a CFO, that's really, really interesting path to be on.
Actually, something I'd be interested in is that if you move to emerging markets, sometimes, I mean, they leapfrog certain technologies. I mean, Germany, when it comes to finance, fintech, everything was super slow. We love our cash so much, so I guess it's not so easy, actually, for N26 to do their business model, I mean, apart from the younger generation. Is that an advantage in emerging markets, that you can sooner really integrate emerging technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think without that leapfrogging, our business model wouldn't have been able to scale. I mean, our dealers are all on the phones. They're all bidding through their iPhones or their Androids. Our sellers have wallets. If bank wires takes time, or they're a hurdle, or they cost money, or for whatever reason, we can most often tap into another payment solution, which is available in emerging markets by now. So the whole speed of that transaction and the auction platform itself to be able to function, it's been crucial for us that technology advancement has been so rapidly growing in emerging markets, for sure.
Actually, our next talk is going to be about insurtech and online insurances. So did you already think of offering an insurance once people buy a car?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think in the future as well, something that we're working on is to offer the data set of purchase and sales prices of used cars. We take, on average, 250 data points of each used car when they go through our inspection. And with that, we get the exact transaction price as well. So having essentially the Kelly Blue Book of emerging markets will be of fantastic value for example, insurance companies when they base their risk on their clients. So that's definitely something we'll do in the future.
Wonderful. Looking forward to hear how your journey will continue. Thanks a lot for
Thank you.
joining us today. Peter Malmqvist.
Great. Thanks. Thank you.